We're going to discuss today what are the limitations and modelling of ZK. We've got an incredible panel today, so if we'd like to bring the moderator up first of all.
Yep.
Who will then go on to introduce the panel. And this is Enrico, cryptography engineer at PSE.
Okay, I think we can start. Welcome everyone to this panel. My name is Enrico. And before introducing my guests, I wanted to quote something that Tong said in a presentation that I found very interesting, and I think this is a very good way to start and then to introduce the guests. So I'm quoting Tong, which is her, by the way. For someone who's been working on zero-knowledge proof for 4 years, honestly, what my life looks like on a daily basis is just polynomials. It's committing to polynomials, evaluating them, interpolating them, folding them, evaluating them in a different domain, and then back in the original domain. So after 2 years of this, I started to ask myself really why I'm doing this. And I really feel that as a researcher in cryptography that sometimes we kind of miss the whole picture of what we are really working on because we are kind of too focused on small details. And I want to ask, starting from Tong, what do you do? So introduce yourself, what you're doing, but also why you're doing this, considering what what's the bigger picture of what's the real goal of what you're doing in this space. I know it's kind of tough.
Oh yeah, well, I'm still working with polynomials, and right now I'm secret sharing them. So I've continued to work on applied zero knowledge as well as multi-party computation. And what motivates me is just building better applications. So applications where we can be very intentional about the purposes, about the limits, about how we use the data that we collect. And I think, we have access to a very powerful suite of tools to enforce these application designs.
Cool, thank you. If you want to pass to Liam, and then we do a round of introduction.
Can you repeat the question?
So basically, what do you do, but also why you're doing this? Why do you feel this is important?
Yeah, so I do ZK research, different things, folding schemes, lookup arguments, etc. I work at Alpen Labs and also with some other projects, Aztec, and why? I think sort of two things. I find the work fulfilling and I like the math, but also I'd like to see it used for things like bringing privacy to people. And I think that the spirit of your quote is good, that it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. So
thank you. Yeah, Lasha.
Hi, I work on ZK identity stuff, and especially love iterating and pushing and planting these seeds of in the real world use cases. And I guess why I do this, I just came from this session at DevCon, and we were discussing this trust building stuff, and I kind of understood that I have this civilian trauma from my past and where I grew up, and I kind of don't trust the systems, especially government and kind of bureaucracies, and I view it as a kind of a shortcuts and this path to freedom and independence on an individual level, and that really drives my passion.
Right. I'm Evan. I co-founded a protocol called Mina, where we're working a lot on zero-knowledge proofs, particularly, most recently, getting them to be in a place where they're programmable by developers so they can build applications with them, kind of in a general purpose way, similar to what you can do with EVM, but instead for directly building with zero-knowledge proofs for privacy. Been doing that for a while. I originally was doing stuff in briefly in the polynomial land, but have been in the applied world now for a little bit. I think as to like why I think like what originally attracted me to cryptocurrency was this idea that we could build these systems that had the better trust properties than trusting like a centralized institution that, you know, oftentimes we see has lots of problems, but we could potentially build with software institutions that we know are going to follow the rules they're going to follow and that we can trust better. And like it's felt like zero knowledge proofs are just a very useful technology towards building that, both so you can like have large amounts of compute that can be trusted all the way out to like the end user devices, as well as so users can like share their private data with these systems in a way that doesn't compromise that data, so they can have much richer interactions because they can finally share this data with these systems without necessarily exposing it. Yeah.
Okay, I think so. A word that came up many times in your introduction is like trust, and like the need to remove this trust into like system and centralized entities that they work today. So I want to start from Eagen, from the last one, because I think probably you are the closest one to like the application user in the panel. And yeah, I wanted to understand like from your experience at Mina Protocol, like who are your users, both on like the developer side and the final user side, and like what do they want? Like what is something that really you feel that is taking over, that is, because like in this context of like trust in digital computation, like where do you think like the real need is?
I mean, I think there's like a number of different kind of types of users that we see. The first is just like developers that are excited about building with the technology, maybe because like they like the idea of having these trustless applications. So they're not quite end users, but they're building for users. We work with people like that a lot that are trying to build some application that has different trust properties. I think going down the stack, it's kind of like there's really kind of two types of use cases. One is people that are trying to like mitigate risks, like existing risks in the system. Like they want to be able to do things like voting, for example, in like a private way, and they don't like how the existing options, and they want there to be other ones. I think the other one we often see is actually, it's kind of interesting on like the corporate enterprise side, like companies that want to unlock more data that they can't necessarily at least easily do so right now, because it's you know, there's regulations and other issues that prevent like the easy sharing in like a safe way. So we kind of see they're different. And we kind of see these two like unlocking more data to be used, as well as like mitigating existing kind of risks. Yeah.
Right. So you said regulation. Like I want to follow up on that with Tong. So I know Tong used to work at Zcash at a very, very early time of Zcash. And like for me personally, Zcash was like the coolest thing after Bitcoin probably, and still is the coolest thing in my opinion. So like regulation probably played an important role in kind of hindering the adoption of Zcash. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, like, it seems that we keep trying to build like new application of ZK, of privacy, stacking up all this kind of crazy technology. But probably the most important application of ZK, which was private money, we kind of feel like we already solved that, but kind of no one is using it, right? So yeah, I wanted to ask you, why is that? Because it feels to me that we already moved over Zcash, but still it is not used. So why is that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think Evan's point about regulation is like a great framing. It's coming from like the corporate perspective, where you actually don't want the liability of like handling people's data. You want to use it. You don't want to see it. You don't want to know about it. But you want all the business insights from it. So that's like one way in which regulation pushes companies to adopt privacy solutions. I think that's a super like underrated framing and very compelling. So but on the flip side, from the consumer side, private money, as you said, is like the most basic use case. We think we solved, like technologically we've solved it. But basically you run into issues around KYC. You run into issues around on-ramp and off-ramp. And what these amount to is basically issues of usability. If users just cannot pay their rent, pay for their food in using this currency, they're not going to use it. So I think like my experience at Zcash, I've seen basically lots of very, very good outreach efforts, sort of initiatives to communicate with regulators, to educate policymakers. And I think recently they had this like privacy summit in DC, actually. I think regulations can, like, on the one hand, push adoption, on the other hand, have a chilling effect. It's definitely a work in progress. But I do think, like, from what I saw at Zcash, there's reason to be optimistic about, like, communicating with policymakers and regulators.
Thanks. I think this is also a great follow-up for Lasha, which with this identity protocol Rarimo is now. So you have to explain it to us, like how did your activation in Georgia worked, and did you interact with institution? Was it easy? Was it tough? Do they understand what you're even doing?
Yeah. So basically my experience is that, like, I worked around the government and officials from both sides. So very first, my blockchain experience was like working with the government of Ukraine 2015. Like, we didn't have much, but the idea of, like, could we use the certain puzzle pieces back then, looking from this retrospective, to run some anti-corruption, more like transparency type of policy things. And unfortunately, the friction I got, like, even though that it was very supportive verbally, when it came down to the productization and the kind of process rebuilding, and especially like the regulatory support of it, it just wasted 2 years of my life. But I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
This time, approaching the same type of like voting and governance, I went into extreme cases. So it's more like finding an ally is that potentially in long term want to be in power and somehow empowering them to use those tools. So this time I work with the rebels and the opposition that are exiled from Russia. The opposition leaders that more or less tech savvy, they mentioned they own Bitcoin, so I checked all this kind of information and made a kind of a bet on them to push those solutions, whether it's like decentralized voting, polling, all this kind of inclusion tech that could see a light at a larger scale. So beside that, like, yes, we kind of await the regulation to support it and like catch up. I think like the most of the time it's just a trap, and it's more like something on paper in front of the cameras than the real execution that really gets done. So I'm, beside doing all that, I'm the least optimist of that it might tilt in our favor.
Right. So going beyond the regulation aspect, I wanted to ask Liam more from a researcher perspective, who likely, I guess, doesn't have to deal with like regulation and institutions. Like, how do you see the research space evolving? Like, we can all see from the outside that like the improvement that are coming from the ZK acceleration are incredible. And yeah, I'm trying to understand if you see that we are kind of hitting some sort of plateau in there, like there's still room to improve. Does it even make sense to improve? There's something that we cannot do today with ZK that we could probably do if there was another, I don't know, huge step in the improvements. I just wanted to hear your feeling from a researcher in this topic.
Yeah, I think when it comes to ZK, there are still sort of open problems, but less so than in the past. I think client-side proving still has a lot of room to improve, and especially on like memory-constrained devices like phones and whatnot. But also in terms of just what it's possible to do with ZK at all, like, you know, multiple people with mutually private state, you need more robust or more types of cryptography, multi-party computation, even like more exotic things like functional encryption or indistinguishability obfuscation. So there's a lot of like research to be done and technologies that have not been applied to privacy, in part because they don't exist, in part because ZK was just sort of, this like private money thing was really perfect. And I think a lot of other technologies have struggled to find this sort of perfect application. But yeah.
Okay, let's move to the next topic. That is something that is also kind of, let's say, controversial sometimes. And I genuinely want to hear your answer to that because it's something that I keep asking myself. So we are building like privacy application, like ZK power application for verifiable computation to solve this problem of digital trust, if you will. Do we really need a blockchain into that? Like, how does it fit? Because sometimes it feels that we are kind of forced to fit this into the narrative because, you know, we are like companies and we need to produce revenues. Maybe there's like gas and token involved. So yeah, I'm wondering, like, do you think we need blockchain for that? And if so, what's the real value of the blockchain in this kind of application context? So I will start with Mina.
I can start. I mean, this is a question like it comes up a lot for us because we talk to potential users of our platform and we put up solution. You know, we talk about a possible solution, and it's like, okay, like, does this actually even need Mina or not, or is this just an application of zero knowledge proofs? What I think we found often is there are actually a lot of applications that don't necessarily need a blockchain and just use zero knowledge proofs, but there are also a lot of applications that have some notion of shared state between users or between organizations. And then once you have shared state, there's a question of how are you going to coordinate that shared state over the different parties? And then it does make sense to bring a blockchain in. I think when you look at the actual architecture, is one thing that's interesting is oftentimes for these applications, a large amount of the actual like participation and work does happen off chain, and the coordination is only like one part. Maybe it's just like checking inclusion in like a Merkle tree or something. But we do find like most applications do have shared state, and then they at least have some limited use of blockchain. But I think we're still figuring out like there'll be something, but we're not sure how extensive it'll be yet, but at least a little bit. Yeah, and for some a lot actually.
Yeah, I think of it like that as well. Like ZK and blockchain coincide when you have a public shared state that you want to verifiably update. And I think also an interesting point is when you have a private shared state, and in those cases, ZK is not enough. It's basically the design pattern of ZK plus blockchain is that either state is updated on a like per user basis, such as in Zcash, appending a note commitment and appending a nullifier. Or state is updated by some off-chain centralized party. That's the case for all rollups. So when there's actual shared state, like say, for example, an order book with private orders and the matches are shared, then we need basically more powerful primitives that enable computation over shared state. Yeah, but I think definitely the marriage of ZK and blockchains has unlocked like private applications with public shared state. Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
And actually, yeah, on that note, what I would say is that like when we started off like very public chains, right? ZK is actually enabled to bring more stuff within these chains, and it kind of like accelerated this cooperation between like within the identity space at least, right? So we started off with just a single state of a credential that could be verifiable by multi-parties and sharing this thing. But as we kind of move further and then employ ZKs, we can build like the nullifier registries, we can build like all these amazing things, even the issuer. Like I have an issue with an issuers within this kind of frameworks, especially with the passports. I'm like, why do we need the dependency on like external hardware when we can have blockchain as the kind of self-issuing aspect, especially with the document that have a signature in it, right? So, and over time, the improvement of ZKs, I think within the identity space allows us to bring more and more stuff inside the chains. And that's going to accelerate across the other verticals as well.
Okay, I would say you kind of partially convinced me. I understand the concept that we need this state to exist on a blockchain, but I also think that there are many applications that are not very like time sensitive, probably, in which probably we can also keep this state somewhere on a server. You don't really need like this also timestamping property that a blockchain might have. But I think I'm really curious to ask something, Liam, because I saw that you were involved in this Bitcoin VM, which is something that seems that no one really speak about in our context, but it's kind of crazy that we were allowed to do that. So please explain us what are like this effort with the Bitcoin VM and what it unlocks.
You're talking about BitVM?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, sorry. Well,
Yeah.
BitVM.
It's I guess in short, right? We're probably all familiar with Ethereum. You can verify smart contracts on Ethereum. Bitcoin also has smart contracts, but they're very limited. So you can't verify snarks on Bitcoin directly. So BitVM is this basically new kind of optimistic type approach to verifying snarks on Bitcoin, which allows you to construct lots of things that you would be familiar with from Ethereum and other projects on Bitcoin.
And is it actually real? Like, can we do this today, or is like something futuristic?
It's possible, unlike some other things with Bitcoin, but it's still in active development.
Is it real? He asked.
What does it mean for something to be real?
So let's say I want to build like a Rarimo on Bitcoin. Is it possible to do that?
I think right now, probably not, but hopefully soon.
And what's the missing part? So
No. So that's yeah. There is another approach to verifying snarks on Bitcoin based on something called opcat, which is not possible right now, requires a soft fork. BitVM does not require a soft fork, but is still being implemented. So,
Okay, cool. I think that's a good conclusion. And I encourage you to study more on this BitVM because I think it's super cool. And also all the other great stuff that the panelists are doing. Thank you.